Hello, and welcome back to Case Closed Chronicles, the channel where we unravel the most intricate criminal puzzles. Today, we're diving into a story of ambition, deception, and a poison plot hidden in plain sight, right at the heart of a corporate empire. Before we expose the truth, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an investigation. Now, let's get into the case of the poison magnate and the forged inheritance. Alastair Finch was a man who commanded the world from 72 floors above the sprawling city. His office, a minimalist expanse of glass, chrome, and Italian leather, was less a workplace and more a throne room. From this vantage point, the city below was a mere schematic, a collection of assets and liabilities he could manipulate with a phone call or the stroke of a pen. At 68, he was the architect and undisputed emperor of Finch Global Enterprises, a conglomerate with tentacles in everything from shipping to software. He was a man of rigid routine, unyielding standards, and a deep-seated belief that trust was a commodity to be invested in sparingly. And for 25 years, he had invested all of his professional trust in one person, Evelyn Reed. Evelyn was more than a secretary. She was the operating system of Alastair Finch's life, a woman in her late 40s, with a perpetually serene expression and an unassuming wardrobe of muted grays and navies. She was the picture of quiet efficiency. She knew how Alastair liked his tea, Earl Grey, splash of milk, no sugar, served at precisely 10 a.m. and 3 p.m. She knew which calls to put through and which to bury in an avalanche of polite excuses. She managed his schedule, his correspondence, his travel, and even reminded him of his children's birthdays, which he invariably forgot. To the outside world, she was a fixture, as much a part of the Finch Global penthouse as the ridiculously expensive abstract sculpture in the lobby. To Alastair, she was simply Reed, an indispensable, if unremarkable, cog in the machine of his life. The decline began subtly. It started with bouts of dizziness, which Alastair angrily dismissed as vertigo from the sheer height of his office. Then came a persistent flutter in his chest, a nagging arrhythmia he blamed on too much coffee and too little sleep. His personal physician, a man who had long ago learned not to argue with his powerful patient, suggested a battery of tests. Alastair refused. He didn't have time for hospitals. He had an empire to run. Just a bit of indigestion, Reed, he would rasp, waving away her gentle suggestions to go home early. Get me the quarterly reports for the Asian market. Evelyn would nod, her expression a perfect mask of calm concern. Of course, Mr. Finch, but first drink your tea. It will help settle your stomach. She would place the delicate porcelain cup on his vast desk, the steam rising in a fragrant wisp. He would grunt his thanks and take a sip, never noticing the faintest of smiles that touched her lips as she turned and walked away. Evelyn was a keen amateur botanist, her small suburban garden a riot of meticulously cultivated flora. Her specialty was rare and beautiful flowers, including a particularly stunning patch of purple foxgloves, their bell-shaped blossoms drooping with a potent, secret grace. The end came on a Tuesday, a day like any other. The market had opened strong. Alastair had verbally eviscerated his head of acquisitions over a failed merger and was preparing to do the same to his legal team. At 3 p.m., Evelyn brought him his afternoon tea. He was barking into his phone, his face a ruddy shade of crimson. He gestured impatiently for the cup. Evelyn placed it on his desk. Your tea, Mr. Finch. He took a long swallow, slammed the phone down, and then his hand went to his chest. His eyes, which had always blazed with a fierce intelligence, widened in a look of stunned surprise. He made a gasping sound, like a fish pulled from water, and then pitched forward, his magnificent, custom-built desk unable to prevent his collapse onto the plush, cream-colored carpet. Evelyn didn't scream. Her movements were calm, practiced. She pressed the intercom. Security to the executive suite, medical emergency. Now, by the time the paramedics arrived, it was too late. Alastair Finch, the titan of industry, was dead. The official cause, delivered swiftly by the family doctor after a cursory examination, was a massive myocardial infarction. A heart attack. Entirely plausible for a man of his age, stress level, and temperament. It was a tragedy, of course, but not a surprise. The news of his death sent ripples through the financial world, but it was a tidal wave for his two estranged children, Marcus and Clara. Marcus, a perpetually struggling artist who viewed his father as a corporate despot, and Clara, a coolly elegant lawyer who had kept a respectful but significant distance, arrived at the Finch Global headquarters to a scene of controlled chaos. They were met by Evelyn Reed. She was a picture of dignified grief, her eyes slightly red-rimmed but her composure absolute. She offered them condolences, coffee, and a folder containing all the necessary preliminary paperwork. "Your father was a great man," she said, her voice soft. "It was an honor to serve him." Marcus just grunted. His resentment for his father now mingled with a confusing sense of loss. Clara, ever the pragmatist, thanked Evelyn for her service and her efficiency in a difficult time. The first crack in the perfect facade appeared a week later, at the reading of the will. The family, along with the company's top executives, gathered in the boardroom of Alistair's longtime solicitor, a portly, silver-haired man named Jonathan Abernathy. Abernathy, looking deeply uncomfortable, cleared his throat and began to read. The will was straightforward at first. Small bequests to distant relatives, a generous donation to his alma mater. Then he came to the bulk of the estate. Finch Global Enterprises, the vast property portfolio, the art collection, the liquid assets totaling in the high nine figures. Abernathy paused, adjusted his spectacles, and took a deep breath. "To my loyal and trusted executive assistant, Ms. Evelyn Reed, who has been my steadfast right hand and confidant for over 2 decades, I bequeath the entirety of my remaining estate, including my controlling shares in Finch Global Enterprises." The boardroom erupted. Marcus shot to his feet, his face purple with rage. "What? That's impossible." He hated everyone. He wouldn't leave his company to the tea lady. Clara, though outwardly calm, was pale with shock. She placed a restraining hand on her brother's arm. "Mr. Abernathy, there must be some mistake. Our father's previous will, the one you drafted 5 years ago, left the company in a trust for us." Abernathy looked miserable. "I agree this is highly irregular. However, this is a new last will and testament, executed just 3 months ago. It appears to be perfectly in order. It was brought to me by Ms. Reed the day after your father passed. It is signed by your father, and the signatures have been witnessed." "Witnessed by who?" Clara demanded, her legal mind kicking into gear. "2 junior employees from the mailroom at Finch Global," Abernathy said, consulting the document. "A Mr. Henderson and a Ms. Albright. It was all too neat, and yet completely unbelievable." Alistair Finch was not a man given to grand, sentimental gestures. He was a pragmatist who viewed his legacy as a dynasty, not a golden parachute for his staff. That evening, after a bitter and fruitless argument with her brother, Clara did what she did best. She analyzed the problem. The speed of the will's appearance, the choice of witnesses, the sheer unlikeliness of its contents, it all felt wrong. Her father, a man who would fly his personal lawyer across the country to amend a single clause, would not handle his final legacy with such casual, last-minute arrangements. Her professional instincts screaming that something was deeply amiss, she made a phone call. It wasn't to a colleague or a private investigator. It was to a number she hadn't dialed in years, to an old university acquaintance who had taken a very different path. "Detective Rossi, this is Clara Finch. We knew each other a long time ago. I have a problem. I think my father was murdered." Detective Izzy Rossi of the Financial Crimes Unit listened patiently on the other end of the line. She normally dealt with embezzlement and high-level fraud, not murder. But as Clara laid out the story of the will, Rossi's interest peaked. A billion-dollar inheritance suddenly diverted to a secretary? It was a motive as old as money itself. "A heart attack can be induced, Miss Finch," Rossi said, her voice calm and professional. "And a signature can be forged. I'll need to see that will. We're going to open a preliminary inquiry into the death of Alistair Finch." Rossi hung up the phone, a thoughtful expression on her face. She looked out her window at the glittering towers of the financial district. Somewhere up there, in one of those penthouses of power, a crime had almost certainly been committed. It was clean, it was quiet, and it was nearly perfect. But the greed, Rossi knew, was always in the details. And the first detail she wanted to examine was a single, elegant signature on a piece of paper that was worth $1 billion. The game was afoot. Detective Izzy Rossi was a woman who believed that the most revealing stories were told not by people, but by paper. People lied, they forgot, they obfuscated. Paper, however, held its secrets in the fibers, in the ink, in the subtle pressure of a pen stroke. The last will and testament of Alastair Finch was, to Rossi, the primary person of interest in the case. She met Clara Finch and a fuming Marcus at Jonathan Abernathy's wood-paneled office. The will lay on the polished mahogany table under a desk lamp, looking deceptively benign. Rossi, wearing latex gloves, picked it up. It was printed on high-quality linen bond paper, the kind Alastair Finch had used for all his personal correspondence. The language was precise, legalistic, and at the bottom, in bold, black ink, was the signature, Alastair J. Finch. It was an authoritative signature, full of sharp angles and a decisive underlining flourish. Rossi had already obtained dozens of examples of Finch's signature from Abernathy contracts, letters, checks. To her untrained eye, it looked perfect. "It's his signature," Marcus said, his voice thick with frustration. "I'd know it anywhere. How is this possible?" "A good forger doesn't just copy a signature, Mr. Finch," Rossi explained, her eyes still fixed on the document. "They learn to perform it. They study the speed, the pressure, the rhythm. But no performance is ever perfect. Everyone has a unique biometric signature when they write. There are always tells." She carefully placed the will in a protective evidence sleeve. "This is going to our forensics lab. I have one of the best document examiners in the country. If this is a fake, she'll find it." Rossi's next stop was the Finch Global Building, a gleaming monument to its late founder. She was met in the lobby by Evelyn Reed, who was now the acting CEO. Her demeanor was unchanged, calm, professional, and radiating a quiet authority. She expressed her full cooperation with the police investigation, calling it a formality to put the children's unfortunate concerns to rest. Rossi and her partner, the more grizzled and cynical detective Ben Carter, sat opposite Evelyn in Alastair Snow, her office. The view was breathtaking. "Ms. Reed, you were with Mr. Finch for 25 years, Rossi began, her tone conversational. "That's a long time. He was a brilliant man," Evelyn said, her hands folded neatly on the desk. "Demanding but brilliant. I learned everything from him." "Were you surprised by the contents of his will?" Carter asked, his question blunt. A flicker of something, was it practiced sadness, crossed Evelyn's face. "I was overwhelmed, humbled. Alastair and I had a very close working relationship. In the last few years, especially after his wife passed, he relied on me for more than just work. He called me his rock. I knew he was fond of me, but I never expected such generosity." Her story was smooth, plausible. The lonely old billionaire, alienated from his children, leaves his fortune to the one person who was truly loyal. It was a narrative straight out of a Hollywood movie. "Tell us about the day the will was signed," Rossi said. "It was about 3 months ago," Evelyn recalled, her gaze distant as if searching her memory. "Alastair had been feeling mortal, I suppose. He called me into his office with a document he'd prepared. He said he was making some changes to his final arrangements and needed it witnessed. He asked me to get 2 people who were discreet and wouldn't gossip. And you chose 2 employees from the mailroom?" Carter interjected, his disbelief barely concealed. "Alastair's idea," Evelyn said smoothly. "He didn't want the executive floor buzzing with rumors. He said to get people who just do their jobs and keep their heads down. So I went down to the mailroom. Mr. Henderson and Ms. Albright were there. I brought them up, they came in, Alastair signed, and they left. It took no more than 5 minutes. It was a tidy story, a little too tidy." Rossi and Carter interviewed the 2 mailroom clerks separately. Henderson was a fidgety, nervous man in his early 20s. Albright was quiet and sullen. Their stories matched Evelyn's, but their recall of the details was hazy. They remembered being called up to the penthouse office, which had been intimidating. They remembered Mr. Finch sitting at his desk. They remembered signing a document. "Did you see Mr. Finch sign the document?" Rossi asked Henderson. I think so," he stammered. He had a pen in his hand. He was at his desk. Ms. Reed was standing right there. Albright was even less certain. It was all very fast. Ms. Reed just pointed and said, "Sign here and here." So we did. Neither of them had actually seen the pen touch the paper for the signature of Alistair Finch. They had been presented with a document that already appeared to have been signed. They had simply added their own signatures as witnesses. This was a crucial detail. While the will was under the microscope, Rossi requested that the medical examiner, who had initially ruled the death natural, run a full, comprehensive toxicology screen on Alistair's blood samples. It was a long shot, but Rossi's gut told her the heart attack was too convenient. "What are we looking for, Izzy?" the ME asked. "He was a prime candidate for a cardiac event. Look for anything that could have caused one," Rossi replied. "Something that wouldn't show up on a standard screen. Something subtle." Days turned into a week. The pressure was mounting. Evelyn Reed was consolidating her power at Finch Global, making executive changes and meeting with bankers. Marcus and Clara were calling Rossi daily, desperate for news. The first break came from the forensics lab. Dr. Anya Sharma, the document examiner, called Rossi. "You need to see this, detective." In her lab, surrounded by high-powered microscopes and imaging software, Dr. Sharma pulled the forged will up on a large monitor. "It's a masterpiece," she said, with a hint of professional admiration. "The forger is either an artist or a sociopath. Or both." She zoomed in on Alistair Finch's signature, displayed next to a genuine one. To the naked eye, they were identical. "But look here," she said, pointing to a tiny detail. "The A in Alistair. On every genuine signature, he starts with a heavy downstroke, a real dig into the paper. Then the pressure lessens. That's his natural rhythm. On the will, she switched to a 3D image that showed the pressure points. The pressure is even consistent, the slow, carefully drawn. This is not a signature. It's a drawing of a signature, the work of a very steady but hesitant hand." She pointed out other things. Microscopic pen lifts in places where the genuine signature was fluid, a slight difference in the ink's chemical composition from the pen Finch famously used, and indentation marks showing that the signature had likely been traced from a genuine one. "There is no question," Dr. Sharma concluded. "This will is a forgery, and it's one of the best I've ever seen." Rossi felt a cold thrill of victory. This was the proof she needed. The motive was now tied to a concrete, provable crime. She immediately began digging deeper into Evelyn Reed. The woman's life was a fortress of bland normality. A modest house in the suburbs, a clean credit record, no criminal history. But Carter, a bulldog when it came to digging, found something interesting. Evelyn had a deceased aunt who had passed away a few years prior, leaving Evelyn a small inheritance. The legal paperwork for that inheritance had been unusually messy, held up for months over a disputed signature on a deed. Evelyn had been forced to become a reluctant expert in the minutiae of signature verification. Then Carter found something else. For the past year, Evelyn had been purchasing books online. Not novels, but highly specific, technical manuals, forensic document examination, historical inks and papers, and The Art of Calligraphy, Advanced Techniques. She wasn't just a casual student. She was studying the very science that would be used to detect a forgery. She was learning how to beat the test. The final, devastating piece of the puzzle came from the ME's office. "Izzy, you were right," he said, his voice grim over the phone. "We found something. Took us a while to isolate it. It's digoxin, a heart medication. In its pure, concentrated form, it's derived from the foxglove plant." Rossi's mind flashed back to the interview. Evelyn's serene, calm face. What does it do in high doses? Rossi asked, already knowing the answer. It causes massive heart arrhythmia, nausea, confusion, the ME said. In a man with a pre-existing heart condition, a sufficient dose would trigger a fatal heart attack that would be virtually indistinguishable from a natural one. It's a clever, vicious little poison. Rossi stood up and walked to the evidence board in her office. She pinned a photo of Evelyn Reed to the center. Around it, she started connecting the threads. The forged will, the study of forensics, the manipulated witnesses, and now the poison, a poison derived from a common garden plant. Carter, she called out, her voice sharp with purpose. Get a warrant to search Evelyn Reed's home and property. I have a very strong feeling she has a green thumb. The quiet, efficient secretary was a meticulous planner, a student of her craft. She had planned the perfect crime, leaving a paper trail she thought was untraceable. But she had underestimated one thing. That paper, in the right hands, could scream louder than any human voice. And Detective Rossi was an expert at listening to it. The search warrant was executed at dawn. Detective Rossi, Carter, and a team of forensic officers descended on Evelyn Reed's quiet, suburban street. Her house was exactly what one would expect. A tidy, unassuming brick home with perfectly manicured rose bushes and a neatly edged lawn. It was a picture of suburban tranquility, a stark contrast to the cold, calculated crimes Rossi was certain had been planned within its walls. Evelyn, answering the door in a silk dressing gown, showed no surprise, no panic. Her expression was one of mild annoyance, as if they were canvassers interrupting her morning coffee. Detective Rossi, she said, her voice cool. This is highly unnecessary. We have a warrant to search the premises, Ms. Reed, Rossi stated, holding up the document. Please wait in the living room with Detective Carter. While Carter sat with a stone-faced Evelyn, Rossi led the forensics team through the house. It was immaculate, almost sterile. There were no personal photos, no clutter, nothing out of place. It was the home of a woman who lived her life with meticulous, obsessive control. In a small office upstairs, they found her library. Tucked between books on gardening and classic literature were the volumes Carter had discovered in her purchase history, the technical manuals on ink composition, paper aging, and forensic analysis. On her desk was a high-end scanner and a sophisticated graphics tablet. Evelyn hadn't just studied forgery. She had equipped herself with the tools of the trade, but the real evidence was outside. Behind the house was a small, beautifully maintained garden and a glass greenhouse. As Rossi stepped inside, the warm, humid air enveloped her. The place was filled with exotic orchids, ferns, and, in a prominent, sun-drenched spot, a tall, thriving patch of Digitalis purpurea, foxglove. Their purple, bell-shaped flowers were in full bloom. Bingo, a forensics officer murmured, already preparing to take samples. Back in the house, another officer called out from the basement. Tucked away in a small, locked cabinet behind a water heater, they found her workshop. It was a forger's dream. There were bottles of different inks, implements for distressing paper, and, most damningly, several sheets of Alastair Finch's personal linen bond stationery. On a blotter nearly invisible to the naked eye were the faint imprints of a signature. Under a specialized light, the ghostly image of Alastair J. Finch appeared. She had practiced here, endlessly, until she could perform his signature with flawless, deadly accuracy. With the physical evidence secured, the plants, the books, the tools of the forgery trade, Rossi knew she had everything she needed. Evelyn Reed was brought to the station for a formal interrogation. The interrogation room was a stark, gray box. Evelyn sat opposite Rossi, a picture of unruffled composure. She had her lawyer with her, a high-priced corporate attorney who immediately advised her to say nothing. For a long time there was silence. Rossi simply let her sit, watching her. Evelyn didn't fidget. She didn't look nervous. She just stared back, her eyes cool and assessing. Finally, Rossi began. She didn't shout or accuse. She laid out the evidence, piece by piece, placing a corresponding file on the table with each point she made. First, we have the will, she said, placing the document examiner's report on the table. Dr. Sharma, the best in the field, has concluded it is a forgery. A brilliant one, but a forgery nonetheless. She details the inconsistent pen pressure, the microscopic lifts, the chemical composition of the ink. Evelyn's expression didn't change. Then we have the witnesses, Rossi continued, adding the transcripts of the mailroom clerk's interviews, neither of whom actually saw Mr. Finch sign the document. They were intimidated, manipulated, and presented with a document to sign, a document you had likely already prepared. The lawyer shifted in his seat, but Evelyn remained still. Which brings us to your studies, Rossi said, adding a file containing Evelyn's online purchase history and a summary of the books found in her home. For the past year, you've been taking a masterclass in how to beat a forensic document examiner. You studied the science to learn how to defeat it. Rossi paused, leaning forward slightly. But a forged will isn't enough. You needed to make sure Mr. Finch wasn't around to contest it. That's where the garden comes in. She placed the last and thickest file on the table. It contained the toxicology report and the forensic analysis from Evelyn's greenhouse. Digoxin, a concentrated cardiotoxin, found in Mr. Finch's system, and found in the beautiful foxglove plants growing in your greenhouse. You served him tea twice a day, every day. A perfect, trusted delivery system for a poison that mimics a natural death. Evelyn's lawyer finally spoke. My client is a known botanist. None of this is a crime. This is all circumstantial. Rossi smiled, a cold, humorless expression. Is it? Circumstantial is a woman owning a gardening book. Premeditation is a woman who owns a gardening book, a book on poisons, a book on forgery, the specific plants to create the poison, and the specific tools to commit the forgery, all while her victim, who is about to make her a billionaire, dies of that exact poison. That's not circumstance. That's a business plan. Rossi locked eyes with Evelyn. You planned it for years, didn't you? Every day you went to that office, you smiled, you served his tea, and you resented him. You felt you were the one who really ran the company, that you deserved his fortune. He called you his rock. And all the while, you were patiently, methodically planning to kill him and steal his legacy. For the first time, a crack appeared in Evelyn's icy composure. A muscle in her jaw twitched. Her serene mask was beginning to crumble. He was nothing without me, she said, her voice a low, venomous hiss. The lawyer put a hand on her arm, but she shook it off. For 25 years, I managed every detail of his life and his business. I chose his board members, I vetted his deals, I wrote his speeches. He was just a figurehead. I built Finch Global. Not him. It was my empire. My money. It wasn't a confession born of guilt, but a declaration born of arrogant, profound entitlement. She looked at Rossi, her eyes blazing with a cold fire. I earned that inheritance, she spat. I just expedited the transfer. The lawyer slumped in his chair, his head in his hands. It was over. The trial was a sensation, but the outcome was never in doubt. With her confession and the mountain of physical evidence, the jury found Evelyn Reed guilty of murder and forgery in a matter of hours. The quiet, unassuming secretary, the woman no one ever noticed, was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Weeks later, Detective Rossi stood at her office window, looking out at the city skyline. The lights of the Finch Global building still shone brightly. With the forged will invalidated, control of the company had passed to Clara and Marcus, who, united by the tragedy, had found a new, shared purpose in preserving their father's true legacy. Carter came and stood beside her, holding 2 cups of coffee. To a job well done, he said, handing one to her. Rossi took a sip. She almost got away with it, Ben. She was intelligent, patient, meticulous. Yeah, Carter said. But in the end, greed makes people stupid. She left a paper trail a mile wide, and she underestimated the one person who loves reading the fine print. Rossi allowed herself a small smile. In a world of corporate titans and billion-dollar schemes, justice had been found not in a boardroom, but in the fibers of a single piece of paper, in the leaves of a poisonous flower, and in the quiet, painstaking work of seeing what others had chosen to overlook. The case was closed,